You should read your Bible, sirs. You'll find all types of weird shit in there.
Hey, want to have a rousing discussion about truth, honor, patriotism?
No, not you. Not you. Your organization's terrible. Quiet. I'm not going to give you a question. You are fake news.
How about new, you crazy Dutch bastard?
You ever been mindfucked before?
You are fake news.
The media said what?
Let's see what these deep state characters are up to.
Now you see that evil will always triumph, because good is dumb.
Good is dumb.
Welcome everybody to Dig on America. Is evil always going to triumph, Dutch?
Evil will always triumph because good is dumb. I love that we're all back here on Dig on America. Me, Jasen Dutch, live with Lindsay, a.k.a. Socialistly Awkward, and Mikey Famine, his favorite of all, Shahid, Buttar, our old friend, one of the brightest individuals that I know. Now, I don't think you guys know each other. Have you guys? You guys have never run across each other in the Twitterverse before?
No,
I don't think we've had a chance to do an
I follow you, but
oh, she you get that
nice
one, Shahid. She said, "I follow you." You know what that means? That means go on that phone.
I know. That's okay.
So,
I have this experience occasionally where I'll meet people in public, and they'll have this exchange, and for me, it's humbling just because, I don't know everybody out there, and I'm grateful for anybody who's on the train, as it were.
Yeah, no, I love your content. You have a really great, fresh perspective that we need to have. So,
well, I'll tell you what. For the sake of the fact that we're that you guys don't know each other that much, and for those joining on the Dutch Jasen channel who may not know who Lindsay is yet, this might be the first time they're seeing you. Lindsay, give your quick elevator pitch, and then Shahid, if you would, the same.
Yeah. Hey, so my primary platform is TikTok, Socialistly Awkward. I'm also on Twitter, Instagram. I'm living in the Redoubt in Idaho. So just recounting what's happening, giving everybody a heads up on the extremism, the laws being passed, what's happening, trying to be that canary in a coal mine for everyone about what's happening in the extremist world in the United States. So.
Right on. Thanks for your voice. My name's Shahid. I'm a DJ. I'm a rider, a snowboard instructor. I ride on Substack. I ran for office. Spent a bunch of years in Washington and San Francisco doing nonprofit legal advocacy. If you want to learn how to snowboard, holler at me. And you might dig the beats. I've got an album on Spotify. I've got a single I'm working on with there's the highlight of it is a 3-verse diss track for the CIA, and it's all electronic dance music. I hope to help educate some dance floors if I'm so fortunate, and excited to be with you tonight.
I was gonna say I haven't checked out your music, so now I'm really excited to go see what you've got.
Right on. Yeah, stay for the analysis.
That's what we need.
I was a MC before I ever went to law school and a poet, and then that sort of DJing came a long time later, mostly to spin myself beats because I got tired of waiting for beats to hit. So it's just figured I'd start throwing myself, pitches. And then I found that I loved DJing as much as I liked emceeing. And then that led to production and yada, yada. Anyway, yeah, I do think of the, in the wake of my character assassination and neutralization as a public political figure, my creative voice, I feel like, is sort of the one thing I have left. So I write for Substack to try to share the analysis that I would have offered in Congress. And, my creative voice is as much an attempt to, indulge myself and my voice as distinct from the issues that I hurl myself at as, anything else.
I love that.
Mikey says in the chat he wants you to hear his MTG song. So Mikey usually stops by the chat and he sees me and he says hi to Lindsay and he ignores me. But now Shahid's here, his bromance, right? So he's like, okay, I'm gonna hang around now and like sit in the chat. So Mikey will probably end up joining us, I would imagine, at any minute. Of course, Mikey is always welcome. The
more the merrier, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially, and the less people hear of me, the better. By the way, if you guys are listening over on my Twitch channel, pop over to Dig on America's Twitch channel. You guys should already be following that, but if you're not, it's Dig on America _podcast. And Mikey will maybe, if he is a second, head over to my Twitch channel and pop the link in there, because I'm having some computer issues today right now. But as you can see, I put headphones in, I pulled headphones out. Like even my wired headphones are not working today. The only headphones that are working is my freaking computer speakers. But so I apologize if there's any echo. But
you're living in 2012, Dutch.
Yeah, like 2006, man. I think I'm on Netscape or something like that today.
The irony, though, is this is actually the state of the internet is regression, because as all the corporate platforms demonstrate their, commitment to fidelity and monetization over user experience, you're not the only person for whom all of the peripherals are failing and nothing works anymore. All the platforms aren't designed to work with each other. All the code is becoming, stacked too tight. And so, you fix one thing, it breaks something else. And I think we're witnessing a system-wide erosion to some extent.
Can you just do me a real quick favor? Since Mikey's fanboying you and he likes to criticize me, can you just say in very plain English terms, Mikey, it's not Dutch's fault?
You're gonna make him apologize for you, Dutch?
Because it's always my fault. So we're gonna get into so Shahid put out what we'll do to start. Probably jump around with a few things today. I'm gonna try to keep my mouth shut as much as possible and let the two smarter people here handle business. But Shahid recently wrote a Substack article, as he was talking about before. I got a chance to listen to most of it earlier today. Lindsay, I know you didn't, but that was my fault because I didn't send it to you. Because
I read it. It's fine.
Like, oh, you read it anyway?
Remember how I follow him? So.
Oh, that's right. You read it all. That's right. Lindsay's engaged on a day-to-day basis. So Shahid, now this is all attached to the document leak regarding Ukraine that was put onto a Discord server. Now, I heard it was originally dumped into a Minecraft server before it went into the Discord server, which was, I don't know if that's ever been verified or not, but nonetheless, those leaks came out, about 2 weeks ago now, a week and a half. And as Shahid so eloquently mentioned right before we got onto the show, it's not like breaking news, but you don't hear about it anymore, right? Like, when's the last time that we heard really anything about this on CNN, MSNBC? Anyway, of course, right-wing media is talking about it a little bit, but not even.
If I may, to be fair, even when we did hear about it, nobody heard the actual story because it was never reported accurately. It was watered down from the beginning. And, for instance, whether it's on a Minecraft server or a Discord server, with all due respect, is meaningless and completely irrelevant. Most of what we've heard about the leaks is ultimately irrelevant. The important part about the leaks, what no one has covered, is why they are significant. And the reason they are significant is because the press and Congress are asleep at the switch or they're on the take. And there's been no transparency into the military-industrial corruption and lies that the leaks expose. That's the actual story. And it amazes me how many people can discuss a news story virally for weeks and still miss the point completely. I mean, if anything, to me, the most dejecting aspect of all of this is just how ignorant and, kind of stupid the discourse reveals itself to be, even in the wake of revelations that everyone acknowledges are the most embarrassing for the Pentagon in a decade. They still focus on minutia and, report the leaks as if the most significant things are the discrete data points that they reveal, the state of Ukrainian munitions or the, duplicity towards South Korea. Like, all that stuff matters, but the whole is worse than the sum of its sordid parts. And to report the leaks, it's like mistaking trees for a forest, and it's the forest that we should be focusing on, and no one's even aware of it, because I fear that journalists are either on the take or asleep at the switch, or some combination of too pressed for time and unsophisticated, unable to even recognize these patterns. The editors, I think, are generally complicit because they're selected from the ranks of journalists based on their pliability and willingness to be complicit ultimately. But yeah, I think the leaks, everybody kind of missed the point, and I would, I still remain quite eager to see there some modicum of accountability, either in the institutional press, which remains complicit in this ongoing pattern of Pentagon lies, or Congress, frankly, from which we need independence from the executive branch if we are to have any hope for anything from civil rights, civil liberties, peace, what have you.
No, I agree. I even think the way that this played out, I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist, but I think people in power know how to bury a message quickly. They figured it out. And they're very effective at this. And so the very first I heard of it was Marjorie Taylor Greene calling him a hero.
Right.
And so all of the messaging, all of the discussion immediately shifted to, is he a hero? Is he a traitor?
Which is equally irrelevant.
Yeah, which
right.
became 90% of the conversation. And it was really great for the right and the left, because the right had a take, the left had a take. They didn't have to think about it further. It didn't actually matter what was in the leaks. It didn't matter the implications of what was in the leaks. Is he a hero? Is he a traitor? Everyone has a side. Everyone's going to go fight about those points on Twitter. And we don't have to have a discussion about what this means for our country, what this means for the Pentagon, what this means for privacy, security, and the military industrial complex in our country. And so I feel like it was almost very skillfully managed by people who wanted it to go away. And that's why nobody's talking about it anymore.
I agree on all of those points. If there was any place I'd defer, I think the reason we're not talking about it anymore is just because the media has the attention span of a gnat. But I do think the story was very carefully managed from the outset, and it was fun, in the sense, okay, here's one way to look at these documents. Here's another way. There were like 6 stories. Yeah. There was the story about overclassification of, military secrets. There was a story about the inability to guard secrets. There's one about South Korea, one about Ukraine. There was one about Moscow, and like none of those, each of those stories are significant, but none of those stories is the story. Right. It's like when the Snowden revelations came out, there were like, half a dozen stories in the course of a week. And each one of them represented a bombshell, like the revelation of the PRISM program, a revelation of Bull Run. Each of those discrete programs that were revealed were a big deal. But throughout the reporting on the revelations, I feel like at the time, the press did a fairly, I think, a reasonable job of focusing on the story rather than the minutia. And these leaks in 2023, all anybody's heard about is minutia. And, I'm really curious about, well, where were the heads of the intelligence committees? Why were these leaks actually revelations to anyone? Why were these not publicly known in the first damn place? And why is there no public outrage over that? We elect people to be interlocutors and overseers of the executive branch. These things are not supposed to be secrets in the first place. And so the fact that they are secrets reflects that somebody fell asleep at the switch. And there's a whole bunch of them. There's 435 of them in the House and 100 more in the Senate.
I would argue they weren't asleep at the switch, Shahid. That's the thing, is they're all
they might be on the take
together and they're wide awake.
Yes, no, absolutely. That's the title of the article, on the take or asleep at the switch. I'm not sure which it is, and I frankly don't care. I'm just amazed that the discussion about the leaks hasn't focused on any of this yet.
Well, here's the problem: Trump isn't in the story, so it has no stickiness, right? Like that.
Right.
That's literally the main thing. If the story was about Trump, if this was, and God knows, I despise that vile creature. But if they had found, that he had slept with a porn star last week again, that would be what we'd be talking about. No doubt. And we would talk about it for ad nauseum. The right wing is actually correct when it comes to Trump derangement syndrome on the left. Now, they don't realize that they have it themselves the other way, right? Like, so they
Probably worse, one would argue, but
way
yes.
worse. But well, maybe not way worse, but they certainly also share that there are some people on the left who are Trump obsessed. That is true. But that happens because of the media. Look back at the 2016 election, 2015, the campaign. Trump got 85% of the media coverage on MSNBC. There were 17 candidates on the Republican slate and 3 on the Democrat slate. That's 20.
Can I
You got
reference something?
That's insane.
This is continuing in the 2024 election. Reuters put out a story today naming all kinds of candidates. Conspicuously, Robert Kennedy's name was in a smaller font, non-bolded, unlike the rest of them. And Marianne Williamson, the first to file, doesn't even appear anywhere on the list. And this to me is a reflection of the continuing bias in the press. The idea that Reuters is effectively hiding candidates from the voters would suggest that the electoral process is more theatrical than it is a meaningful reflection of the consent of the governed. And I think that's something also that people don't grip at all.
Well, we saw that in 2016. Like that was very clear with all the messaging with Trump, but also on the Dem side, how any discussion about Bernie, and I know we could have a discussion about Bernie Bros and what that was, but Bernie doing well was never mentioned. That was never discussed, except for to deride it or be dismissive. And the messaging from day one was, it can only be Hillary. It has to be Hillary. Hillary's the only one who can win. It has to be Hillary. And how I heard so many people repeating that. And I was like, okay, tell me why. Why does it have to? I want a woman president as much as anybody else.
The Backstreet Boys.
But
tell me why.
Yeah, tell me why. Ain't nothing but a heartache. So I would ask people why though? And they just say, well, because it's her turn. No, give me a reason. It's because you heard it on CNN that she's the only one. But give me a data point. Give me some kind of information. And so I don't think there's any reason for us to expect it to be any different now. We saw that in the 2020 election. What year is it? Oh my God.
It is
we
the
saw
8th
that
year
too.
of the 2016 primary.
It does feel like Groundhog Day.
Like what? We're having another election. I can't keep doing this.
Yeah, but to circle back, I mean, everything you guys are saying is exactly right. I mean, but that explains why they're not talking about this, right? But to circle back to it, the conversation when these leaks first came out seemed to be centered around, the White House response to them, right? And the White House comes out and they say, hey, we do have 12 or 14 troops, but they're at the embassy. Mm-hmm. So the second that I heard them say that, I'm like, yeah, they're just at the embassy playing Uno or watching The Mandalorian. That's what they're doing there. They're
sleepover.
They're just chilling. They have nothing to do with strategy. They have nothing to do with
wars. Don't start this way.
I believe that they're not out there firing bullets. I understand that. However, even if you're there from a strategic point of view, you're involved. And if Russia were to inadvertently hit or on purpose hit the U.S. embassy and kill those Americans, including 12 servicemen, those servicemen are going to fight back if they have the opportunity to do so, because I don't know, they're servicemen and they're armed and they've taken an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States and its sovereign, land, which is that embassy. So now what? Again, I'm not saying that if they really are there playing Scrabble and watching HBO Max, then fine. But no one believes that that's the case.
Right. And we should look at this.
Insane.
And we should look at this moment in history and this instance of Pentagon lies through a lens informed by the recurring pattern of Pentagon lies over the last 75 years that in one instance after another have been revealed only after years of official and institutional deference by the press, as well as the people's representatives in Congress. And everything surrounding the theater in Ukraine resembles, in my political history, the war in Iraq, or in another generations, the war in Vietnam. There are absolute parallels in every one of these instances. In every one of these instances, there are false pretenses for conflict, largely as an excuse to sell weapons. And the press dutifully repeats the Pentagon's lies. People get duped by the propaganda. They wave a bunch of flags around, a bunch of weapons show up somewhere. Everyone loses track of them. People will die en masse for decades. And the only people who will come out on top are military contractors. And,
I agree.
Right. The United States of death and destruction will not be deterred. And, that's what we are facing in Eastern Europe, is an entire country of Ukrainians being used as cannon fodder by NATO to sell a bunch of weapons in a war that they don't seem poised to win, in a war that they don't seem to have ever apparently been poised to win, in a war through which, just like in Iraq or Afghanistan or Vietnam, or pick your country that the U.S. invaded, theaters where we've all been getting spoon-fed lies. And I just don't understand how anybody falls for it anymore. It's just so transparently obvious and predictable. And, the same thing's now happening in East Asia with China. And the saber rattling is not only unnecessary. I mean, it's not like we're not living through a climate catastrophe. Like we have to, throw a couple world wars with nuclear armed powers on top of it. Like it'd be great if we could just focus on one set of existential threats to life on Earth. But no, we have to proliferate them because our leaders are too stupid or co-opted or asleep at this, some set of these things to guard the public interest.
And I hate to go to economics with this, but it's always all about economics. It's always to uphold our beloved capitalist system. I mean, this is when I have these conversations, and I'm going to try to not pull this too far off of the topic, but I think it's poignant to be said that when I have these conversations with my conservative friends and family members, for that matter, and they'll say, "Oh, look, Biden's getting us into an endless war." First of all, you didn't care about endless wars until you claim that we didn't have any under Trump. But I got news for you: Trump's guilty of fucking war crimes too, right?
Well, they should look at Bolivia and Venezuela in particular, because there were coups likely initiated by the CIA under Trump in both of those countries that nobody paid attention to.
And he increased the embargo. He doubled down the embargo that was set by Obama on Venezuela, where Obama classified Venezuela as, I forget the exact words, but an existential threat or something of that nature, which is absolutely absurd.
A state sponsor of terrorism, I think is what it was.
So, but when I have
we're the ones bombing the Nord Stream pipeline.
Suddenly you're against war. That's great. I'm happy to have you here, despite the fact that John Bolton was in the Trump cabinet and you thought he was the greatest thing in the beginning and then hated him at the end. So now you get to play this anti-war narrative, which is fine. Welcome to the team. Happy to have you here. However, you realize that all of this is to uphold U.S. industry. Everything that we do overseas, every proxy war that we fight, every time that we go in and topple a government, every time that we go in and try to set up a democracy in another country, it is always to try to steal resources to help U.S. businesses. That's true in Venezuela. It's true in Colombia. It's true in Brazil. It's true in Mexico. It's true in Saudi Arabia. It's true. That's more British people, but the British in Saudi Arabia, but definitely the U.S. is there with Kuwait, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right.
Yeah. And the Yemen genocide.
And then they talk about this fucking funding from the U.S., which, to be fair, it was 60 billion the last round out of the 850 billion, 1.7 trillion, the funding package, 850 million for the military, 50 to 60 million of that for Ukraine. But they're like, "Oh, we're just dropping money on Ukraine." I'm like, no, you're missing the boat completely. They're not dropping the money on Ukraine for Ukraine. That's coming directly back to Boeing, to Northrop Grumman, to who's the one I'm missing? Lockheed Martin,
Raytheon, Lockheed.
Raytheon. Yeah, it's coming right back to them with So basically, we're paying for weapons to be sold to another country. But the real winner here is the weapons manufacturers. It's always the weapons manufacturers or the oil companies, etc. Capitalism is so benevolent. It has nothing to do with capitalism. You just are a socialist. You just hate capitalism. No, this is the reason why this is happening. Open your fucking eyes.
Well, and that's why you're so much more gracious than I am, because welcome to the team. They're only on this side because their person isn't president. The minute
I'm more gracious
their person is president, the minute they say that, I'm like, nah, I'm not here for it. I'm not here for it, because if their person was president, it would be, we need to do this. We got America strong, on and on and on. And so the minute their person is in
Abraham
power,
Accords, yay!
yeah, it's like to this day, the only reason I think that we did not go to war with Iran was because of COVID, because the saber rattling in early 2020 was insane.
That's not crazy.
I thought for sure we were going to war with Iran. And so that's why I'm not ready, because they haven't proven that when their person is president, they have those same feelings about not feeding the military industrial complexes, because their whole reason about not wanting to give money to Ukraine is it's not rooted in they don't want a war. It's rooted in, well, I want that money for, why aren't we feeding our people? It's never about starve the war machine. It's, well, why are we giving all our money? Like our school's falling down and we're giving our money to Ukraine. It's not about actually stopping this.
It's because Biden's giving money to Ukraine.
Yeah.
There's two points I'd want to make here that are sort of tangential to where the conversation's going, but I think interesting to touch on. So, one, Lindsay, you mentioned that Iran was the target du jour before it became, Eastern Europe and South Asia, East Asia. So the history in Iran is particularly important. I think it was 53, maybe 57. But Iran tried to nationalize. This connects, Dutch, your point from before with the place that Lindsay was going. What Iran tried to nationalize its oil fields. They tried to take their oil off the international market and deny it from Shell and Chevron and Texaco. And the U.S. responded with a CIA-sponsored coup that removed a democratically elected, relatively liberal leader. And when I say liberal, I don't mean like, Democrat. I mean like a liberal, like a Western friendly.
Like women could go to college.
Yeah.
Right. And didn't wear head coverings. There was no pressure around that. It was relatively Western. Under the leader that was removed by the Pentagon and CIA. They put in place a brutal dictator who inspired an inevitable revolution led by zealots and students. The zealots murdered the students, and there's been a right-wing theocracy ever since. So good job, Pentagon. And where was the accountability for that scheme that went horribly awry? There's never been any accountability for that. The Bay of Pigs, we invade countries at the drop of a hat to steal their resources, and no one's ever been held accountable for any of the lies. And the worst part of all, this is, circling back to where we started, is that when a bunch of secrets come out, the press is so gullible, so co-opted, that they don't frame it in the context of this recurring, endless, continuing pattern of unaccountability and corruption. And that's the story that the leaks reveal, and the complicity of Congress in all of it. And none of these actors have borne any accountability, because everybody's focused on the leaker and what does he represent? And who cares? It does. I mean, fine, talk about it, but talk about the issue. If you're going to talk about the minutia, at least talk about the elephant in the room.
Yeah, we may as well not even have protections for whistleblowers in this country. I mean, just because Biden is not out there saying who's the whistleblower like Trump was. We got to find out who this whistleblower is and let it, remember that story? Biden's not doing that. They're just doing it behind closed doors. All right. Who's the whistleblower? They don't go on CNN and say this. They're in front of a rally, so it's like, in a way, he's more politically shrewd about it than Trump was. But, it's still equally as damaging that whistleblowers in this country don't have the protections that we're supposed to be affording whistleblowers.
When I ran for Congress, one of the issues I ran on was shifting the classification regime so that military or executive officials would have to justify some claim to secrecy over a document before it would become presumptively beholden to these protections. And the point of there is shifting a burden of proof. At the moment, the executive branch can just classify things willy-nilly. No one ever knows what becomes secret. No one ever looks at it. These things get buried. Random things pop out. There's no order within the chaos. And no one's minding the store, as these leaks reveal, right? A relatively junior person having access to information that you think is quite secret, handing it out to teenagers because it made him feel important or whatever. I mean, it's clownish, and also illustrative of a systematic failure that individual accountability can't fix. Like, this is a system problem. Previous administrators of the classification system themselves have described it in their own words as bloated and dysfunctional, and Congress hasn't ever fixed it. And so I wanted to fix it. And, I wanted to fix it, among other things, on behalf of the press, which is so co-opted that it can't even recognize its own damn interest in any of this. I mean, it just boggles my mind.
And that's why you had to go. That's why you got speared. And,
Yeah. I
I'm
think
sure
that's right.
I'm sure that's at least part of the reason.
If
Oh,
I
yeah.
can connect this to,
You know.
I don't disagree. I just, can't prove it. But to connect the discussion to another of the articles I wrote recently, particularly about Daniel Ellsberg, and Daniel Ellsberg was the military whistleblower who helped end the Vietnam War and bring down the Nixon administration. His example is very relevant to today's discussion because he himself has acknowledged that the press today lacks the independence to do what it did when he came forward. When he came forward, the Vietnam War ended because the press organized among it dozens of different news outlets. The Washington Post, I think, was the first, or it might have been the New York Times, to publish a piece of the Pentagon Papers before the Justice Department shut them down with an injunction in federal court. And so they passed the document on to, the Baltimore Sun ran a piece of it. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch ran a piece of it. The Chicago Tribune ran a piece of it. The Los Angeles Times ran a piece of it. We don't even have that many independent media outlets left anymore.
No.
There's been so much corporate consolidation that there's no capacity for that kind of independence in the press. And so to think about this from another angle, the other thing the leaks expose is that our vaunted free press in the United States is worth a heaping, steaming pile of dog shit. It's just effectively state propaganda. And this also is not frankly new. I mean, the New York Times swung the 2004 election for Bush by sitting on the story that Edward Snowden eventually forced into the public view. And, that would have ended the Bush administration after the first term. And how different would history look like if the press just showed up for work? And even if we don't have accountability for Congress, and that's really tough, we should at least have market-based accountability for the press.
Yeah.
And so that's one reason I'm out here, waving this flag in the air and, screaming into the void is that,
I hate to tell you, Shahid, but you already know this. With John Kerry, not too different.
Of course, that's not the point, though.
I know.
Again,
I can never resist getting in those digs at the DE.
I appreciate that. I'm just saying, again, you're letting off the hook the actor that needs accountability, and that's the press, because they're the crucial lever in each of these recurring instances that allows these ruses to be perpetuated and repeated. And so, you're right. At the time, that was absolutely a fair critique.
Why do you?
Sorry.
So the press is money motivated, right? They're under the umbrella of our crony capitalistic system. We all know that they have a slant towards the middle, right? But more of the slant comes towards money. So, but when I sit here and I try to think critically about this, because this is not the first time that we've had this conversation. Maybe on the Friday show, we don't usually talk about this stuff, but certainly on the Wednesday show, this conversation comes up all the time.
The co-optation of the press
and the suppression of independent media, because we try to be a small independent media, right? It's maybe we're just not good enough, and that's fine. But the point of the matter is like the press gets all of we talk a lot about the algorithms and stuff like that, but it's mostly the corporate funding. But I also think that there are large enough, mostly left, or at least left leaning to a point, media outlets where there's enough companies out there these days that I think are being pushed a little bit further to the left than they normally would be comfortable with going, who I think would still be comfortable with advertising with those media outlets and keeping them rolling. So, Shahid, in your opinion, and Lindsay, for sure, let me know too what you think, because I don't know. Is it just maybe I'm wrong and there really aren't enough companies that are willing to do this to foot the bill for these companies to continue going? Or is it that they don't care and they don't want that money? They're just belligerently pushing falsehoods, or maybe not pushing falsehoods in some cases, but sweeping enough stuff under the rug so that it's a non-issue and they don't have to talk about it. Where am I missing here? What point?
May I restate the question just to make sure I'm getting it?
Well,
because I feel like there's a bunch of different questions you could be asking.
It was like 10 questions, so you can answer. You answer whatever one you want.
I'll simplify it. Is there not enough? Is there not enough companies that would support news outlets that had truly left-leaning news? right?
Right, of course. Right. There's
Or
not
would
nearly.
or is it that they just, or is it that CNN and MSNBC are just totally comfortable with being where they're at in the middle right? Or maybe it's both.
Both
I don't know.
and ultimately it's just a reflection of, the economics of corporate advertising and corporate advertising reinforcing corporate favoring news. And and all that's true. I mean, I thought you were asking about corporate consolidation diminishing the capacity for press independence across the field of content publishers. And that's like
I
a whole
wasn't
other
going
thing.
there, but that's also true. Yes.
Right. And then the other thing that I think we're sort of like where we started that I think bears some discussion is that in a country with a First Amendment and supposed freedom of the press and all of this, international propaganda about our respect for press freedom, we are prosecuting publishers for revealing military secrets. We are, hounding whistleblowers as spies and espionage agents, and we are having officials steer the public discussion to obscure their institutional failures. And what that looks like to me is something very far from an open democracy. It looks very far from the vision that people celebrate on the 4th of July. It looks a lot more like authoritarian fascism than most Americans are willing to understand, acknowledge, or admit. And I think the way that the Pentagon leaks have been discussed, independent of what they reveal, it also illustrates this erosion of democracy in America. And I think that the co-optation of the press is unfolding before our eyes, a crucial part of that erosion. And again, it's like everybody's focused on the leaker, or even if we were to focus on Congress and the press, what we're ignoring then is this, if the leaker is the tree and the failure of Congress and the press is the forest, this erosion of democracy as, we're being steered yet into another international conflict, and the untold destruction that's going to come out of this if we hit fast forward, that ultimately I think is like zooming out from the forest, maybe the landscape, if you will, to observe. And, nobody's talking about any of it because we're too stupid as a civilization to have an intelligent conversation about anything, because our institutions that are supposed to be responsible for discourse are all co-opted.
Yeah.
Or when, I don't know where that leaves us, frankly.
Or they decide to defame the person, like in the case of Chelsea Manning. Oh, they were trans, so.
Well, this is what they usually do to people. I mean, Ellsberg faced this too, right? They broke into a psychiatrist's office to try to get dirt on the patient, the military whistleblower, to discredit him. The doctor's office was in a hotel called the Watergate Hotel, and that's what brought down the Nixon administration. So like anybody who comes forward to challenge the military industrial establishment is if you're effective, you're destroyed, or at least they come after you. And, I do take some pride in having drawn enough blood from the empire to have prompted a counterattack. But I see very clearly the repetition of a pattern across decades of history. And it's all out in the open. Journalists read theoretically, but, editors are so... The question I would get at, Dutch, the version of your question is, how is it the case that journalism can be so blind to history when these, the people writing are intelligent people? They tend to have studied things. There are other intelligent people who've studied things, who oversee their work. There's lots of smart people in the mix, and yet nobody can seem to discern the relevance of history to current events. And I just don't understand how that could possibly be true in a civilization that, please.
Oh, no, I was going to say, I think it has so much to do with a normalcy bias. And I think there's still a huge segment of the population that wants to believe we're normal, we're fine, we're super free, we're spreading that freedom.
We're the hero.
Yeah,
everything's fine here.
It's very comforting. And as long as your little bubble remains relatively unscathed, that's a narrative that you can still tell yourself and still look in the mirror and believe it's true. Like just on a very, very micro scale, there is an extreme far right group in Idaho called the Idaho Freedom Foundation, and they were scoring legislators. They were texting them before votes to tell them how to vote, tons of dark out-of-state money, and nobody was talking about it. Nobody was reporting on it. Nobody was talking about what was happening, why legislators were voting the way that they were voting, what they were supporting. And an outside group came in and started reporting about what was happening. This is who's part of the board. This is who's running it. Here's where they're getting their money. And at first they got tons of pushback from all the legislators, because all of them have accepted gifts and money from lobbyists. They've all probably done something that they don't want super reported and discussed because it's complicated and they might not look good to their constituents. And so once this group just kept pushing and pushing and pushing and discussing it, finally different people in the media, and I mean, this is such a microcosm example, but they started reporting about it and they did this huge 4-part discussion. It was like people were angry, people were furious, people lost elections over it, donors left, and it really shifted the power of this group in the state. They're not gone, but they're nothing like what they were in 2014. But journalists came forward and said, well, we kind of would talk about it. And legislators would say, we refuse to give you any interviews. We refuse to talk to you. We're going to call your editor. We're going to talk to your boss. And that was enough to stop the Fourth Estate. And so until another group was willing to jump in front of them and throw themselves at the mercy of everybody, they weren't willing to do anything. And I think that is a huge factor. Everyone just wants to write their viral piece and have somebody else quote it and have it be made into a TikTok and have it, be retweeted. And that's, unfortunately, that has become, I think, a lot of what they're looking for, as opposed to holding people accountable, being the Fourth Estate, fighting for change, fighting for the American people. I know that's an oversimplification of what's happening, but I think that is the shift
I think
we're
that's
seeing
fair.
in media.
I mean, you're saying that clicks versus salience, that they abandoned salience for clicks
at all. Yeah.
No, I think you're right on. I mean, when you talk about the aspiration for virality as distinct from the aspiration for accountability, that is a pretty profound replacement of a professional ethic that happened in broad daylight. And I don't think anybody's grappled with or come to appreciate the profundity of that transition and what it means for democracy, right?
Hold on, let me award you 15 word points for profundity.
Profundity. That's a great word.
Yeah, you're in the lead. Now, I think that's a first one here. Let me ask you a question.
You sound like my brother.
I hope that's not an insult. But I'm assuming
it was from him, not from me. It's not an insult from me to you, but from him to me, it was. Yeah.
Let me ask you a question. Just based on kind of where Lindsay was going, and the reason why I want to ask Shahid this question specifically, as and maybe for Lindsay, I want to maybe frame the same thing to you a little bit different.
Yeah, no, by all means.
You're a progressive, and I know that you for the most part are a vocal ally to the squad. I remember Shahid, when our first interview with you, you said, I'm running for Congress to take Nancy Pelosi out of Congress and join the squad. I believe that's a direct quote, or at least a very close paraphrase. Outside of Bernie, once in a while on some outlet where they're yelling at him, the conversation for universal health care has completely disappeared. The conversation for the $15 minimum wage has completely disappeared after it was written out of the omnibus package in what year are we in now? 2021, that would have been.
I think that's right.
And when it comes to this newest round of leaks, I'm not really hearing any opinion from the squad as far as what they feel about this. And it's not like I'm going to form my opinion based on what Ilhan Omar or AOC or Ro Khanna says. If Ro Khanna is even in the squad, it's kind of in and out once in a while.
Adjacent.
But he kind of goes in, uses
squad
the bathroom.
adjacent.
Yeah. He goes in, uses the bathroom.
He's in the platoon. like maybe a different squad in the same platoon.
But like, what is your opinion on this from someone who, you know, was a lot closer to being one of those people than I'll ever be?
I've certainly been disappointed any number of times. I mean, you didn't, for instance, mention like the Capitol Dome or the Iron Dome or the Capitol Police or the any number of times that, you know, one or another among them has strategically voted and in ways that, you know, would suggest that collectively they may be less committed to principles than we might all have hoped. I think at the end of the day, in the same way that the leaker isn't the story, but rather the failures of Congress, I think the challenges that beset perhaps our would-be allies in Congress to me are less significant than the headwinds that impede them, because I frankly don't even think it matters who they are, as long as they're under the thumb of a Democratic Party leadership that penalizes dissent from within. You know, Pelosi's style of leadership when she held the gavel, I think it remains to be seen if Hakeem Jeffries is going to replicate this.
He's been stepping on progressives for years. When you,
well, so there
this
you
is
go.
not a secret.
Well, and so this is my point. Similarly, I think to fault the squad mistakes the bus that has been rolling over them since the day they each hit Congress. And, you know, I'm going to actually, this might be the first time I don't know if I've ever approvingly quoted Nancy Pelosi before, but there was an interview, maybe like 2019, 2020, where
We're
she
about
said
to
something.
see history.
No, but she was referring to a
after he says
journalist.
this.
A journalist was, you know, asking about her opinions of the squad, and she said something like, "You're talking about a handful of votes in Congress, and ultimately it is a handful of voices in a body of 435, and they are actively marginalized by more or less everybody in that group of 435, certainly the leadership." And so I've been disappointed. The locus of my disappointment is less the voices under the bus and more in the bus rolling over them. I do have some hope for some of them. And I do have some hope that, you know, in a different situation in the future, hopefully they'll start perhaps being more systemically critical of an apparatus that they've grown to seem a little comfortable with. At the end of the day, if we roll back the tape and observe this pattern, you know, when the Congressional Black Caucus came in, they were supposed to be the visionary voices who were going to, you know, represent our communities and expand the discussion and get some transformative policies on the table, and look at where they are now, right? And so in every successive cycle, the freshmen who break through, we really, as a people, have to look to them to set the standard for what is going to be the voice of dissent and critique before they are then in some way absorbed into the Washington amoeba. And, you know, it seems that happens in every successive class. I think it's one reason why it's really important to replace ossified incumbents with fresh new voices that are committed to the future instead of a failed predatory corporate past. Because I think as we get more voices, when it's not just a handful of voices, I hope maybe they would grow the temerity to show up a little differently.
No, I agree. I think it's a systemic problem. And if you throw, like you said, 5 or 8 or 10 voices at this behemoth that has grown to sustain itself over the course of this country, what can they do? And I think they get in and they have good intentions. I don't think that they were selling us a bill of goods. I think they all had good intentions. And I still think some of them do have good intentions. I think once you realize what this is and how limited your powers are and how you are expected to toe the party line if you want anything done, anything for your district, anything for your people, if you want to be reelected, if you want to have been there for 10 years, so now you have enough seniority to actually make a difference, you play by the rules. And I think it's also, it's not problematic for a lot of them to decide to play by the rules, because you get to be part of insider trading. You get, like, there's a lot of perks to playing by the rules. And notice how we haven't talked about the insider trading of Congress ever since this whole story broke about the Pentagon. I don't know, that's just not news anymore. And so I think it's, like you said, we need more of these voices, or they can't effectively change, or they get absorbed, or suddenly they made a deal with a lobbyist that doesn't look great, and so they're going to get called on that unless they stick with the group to protect them. And it's just a systemic issue.
Two dynamics here that are worth observing. One of them is, you touched on it before, how the shoe changes feet depending on the party of the president. So whichever party the president is, because the military industrial complex, supersedes politics, that party becomes identified with the Pentagon, and then the other party becomes the anti-war party for the moment. And so at the moment, it's Republicans who are saying this is all corruption. And somehow, thousands of Democrats across the country who at some point claimed to have anti-war principles enough to embrace a guy with a funny name from Illinois, whose principal qualification from office was that he was an early advocate against the Iraq War. That's what put Obama in office. And it is striking to me that within a decade, Democrats have so lost sight of their own damn principles that they are going to be cheerleaders for wars in multiple theaters against multiple nuclear armed powers, in none of those theaters in which there is a compelling security rationale.
No.
And, it's just like lemmings. And and the other dynamic I was going to know, it was just that, from an electoral standpoint, looking at 2024 and the possibility of a Biden-Trump rematch and Biden's profound vulnerability, let's say.
I know. Oh, Dutch, I want to cry.
Shahid, okay.
Yo, you should.
We've had enough of you.
No, but the point I want to get at is that this is why we need other voices in the Democratic primary. This is why Reuters blocking Marianne Williamson out is so catastrophically destructive, because we need the public to know about our alternatives. We can't just be deferring in every election for the last, at least since 1992, with the exception of 2020, the American people have chosen an outsider, right? Bill Clinton comes to Washington as the governor of Arkansas, an outsider to Washington, at least. George Bush, even though he was the son of a former CIA director and president, at least styled himself as a yokel from Texas. So he accepted as an outsider, however implausible the claim may be. Obama, first term senator from Illinois, an outsider. Trump, I mean, I don't know, absolutely an insider, right? But an outsider to Washington, at least, right? And then here comes Biden, who's been there for 50 years, who manages to steer his way through the primary, through all the chicanery we know about. But the point here is that he breaks a pattern, but the pattern still holds. It's not as if him breaking the pattern is going to set a new pattern. I mean, I think that's the aberration. And the American people want outsiders, because if there's anything that the left and the right can agree on, it's that everything in Washington is corrupt. Now, there's not a lot else they're going to agree on, but the importance of having new voices to the national debate on the Democratic debate stage and on the ballot and in the news articles about the 2024 election, I cannot possibly overstate. And whatever you think about Robert Kennedy, whatever you think about Marianne Williamson, their marginalization that has already begun is a problem for all of us. And I think that as we look at these problems we're describing, and if there is any hope for a constructive solution, I at least see, the opportunity to fight for their inclusion in the debates and to fight for the opportunity for their voices to be heard, at least as one crucial strategic point to address this pandemic of ignorance that seems to have, beset this country.
Let me just toss one real quick thing in here, just to touch on your point. If there's one place that I think that the left, I have been asking a lot of people this question lately on the right, and not one of them has come against me. The most diehard MAGA actually are more in my corner on this than folks in the middle. Money in politics, like it,
right?
There is cohesiveness with this.
Absolutely.
And nobody is doing anything about it, right? Like I don't want a coalition with MAGA really on anything, but it almost, like, this is the epicenter of the issue. Alan Ellison, who I think Shahid,
Alan Ellison,
ran for Senate in Florida.
Oh, right, sure.
Yeah, he made a video that when he ran for Senate in Florida, which went semi-viral, and basically he had $10,000 in his hand. He's like, this could send someone to college. It could feed a family. He's talking about all the things that this $10,000 could do. That was just to be on the ballot in Florida, right? So you have this delta, and it's different in every state, right? But that just happens to be the way to get on the ballot in Florida. And that was for after he had changed his race from Senate to Congress. So that's just a congressional race at that point. And I think there's cohesiveness there. I think that that we could do something, but whatever we're doing isn't working. And on the left, and I'd like to, I'm going to start with Lindsay.
Who's the we there? Just to be
what are we doing wrong as progressives, DSA members, people on the left, as far as like the messaging? Like, what is your guys' ideas as far as like what do we need? How do we need to shift? Because what's happening at the moment, we're trying hard, but there's really not a lot of progress. Do you have any ideas to brainstorm?
I mean, I think Shahid wants to go to bed tonight. So like that's a pretty broad question. Like we could answer that for days. I think,
well, you need to do it in 30 seconds.
I mean, I think just to start off, from the beginning, crushing, like, the Democratic Party has decided the only way forward is the middle, or what they view as the middle. That as much as they feel like they need to appeal to the middle, what the middle is, like this nebulous concept that has become like the most important thing during every election. And to do that, they have squashed all progressive voices. And so while they are busy squashing progressive voices, the Overton window is shifting right constantly, because the right doesn't do that. The right caters to whatever they need to win. They'll say it. They'll do it. Do we have these people saying audacious, terrible things? Yeah, like, we know your uncle says those terrible things, but like, America and freedom and patriotism. And so whatever, throw a MAGA hat on it and we're great. And so by embracing these far right voices, they've shifted the Overton window. And as a response, the Democratic Party continues to silence any progressive voices, any voices asking for, is Medicare for all actually progressive? That's like really minimalist at this point. Like anything to the left of really basic, I'd say like moderate right is where we land anymore. Yeah. Anything to the left of that, they squash it. Green New Deal, radical. Crazy pants. They're radical. Don't listen to them. And they do it to their own people. And so the Overton window is shifting constantly to the right. And instead of addressing that with progressive ideas that people like, that address the issues that people talk about every day. Like, I work in healthcare. People are panicking about how to pay their healthcare bills. The healthcare system is crumbling. It's falling apart more quickly than CEOs can hold it up. And we're watching this happen in real time. And the Democratic Party is doing nothing to address it. And the people who for 20, 30, 40 years who've been trying to address it, they've been silencing them. So they don't actually have any answers for the American people. Their answer is like, do you maybe want extra Medicaid? Kind of. How about that? You could vote for us.
Prescription prices on like 4 drugs.
Yeah, maybe we'll cancel your student loans. Haha, fingers crossed.
Oh my God, that example.
And so I would say that's their biggest issue, or one of their biggest messaging issues right now.
Right. And you'd phrase the question, Dutch, in terms of DSA members, and I can't claim, it made me laugh, because the idea that DSA stands on the left to me is a joke. I mean, it's just absolutely an extension of the Democratic Party. We've seen that over and over again. So like, I don't think I refute the premise of that portion of your question.
I addressed just the Democratic Party, because DSA,
I think that the organization, I definitely agree with that. I think there's folks within it that I know that I wouldn't. I wouldn't say that about. So I don't want to generalize too much. You know what I mean? But,
well, I'm not talking about individuals. I'm just talking about organizations, and that one is completely co-opted
I've blown
and
smoke
useless.
With the DSA 100 times on the show. So
yeah, no, I have very little love lost for sycophants who claim principles and light them on fire to serve their own careers, and that's at least the story of the Bay Area chapters. But what people on the left, and I don't think messaging is a problem ultimately. I mean, this is so right. To some extent, you're asking about the tree. You know, what do we have to do differently? The forest in which we are situated it has a bunch of lumberjacks that are cutting down our trees. I don't think we have equal access to the mechanisms of discourse, which is to say, it doesn't frankly matter what we say. The illusion that there is some equal battlefield of ideas, I think, is a fantasy. And so I don't think any messaging change is going to fix this. Our problems are bigger than messaging. I do think, to the extent there were any recommendations I would have for what people talk about, I think whatever passes for the left in this country has a worker fetish, which makes sense, especially given our aspiration to more widely distribute resources and our recurring inability to demonstrate a power analysis to understand where to focus our critique means that we get rolled over and over and over again. We sort of rally around causes du jour and we mistake forests for trees. We take our eyes off corruption. When you were talking about points of commonality between the left and the right, at its broadest ambit, what we are talking about is corruption. The right shares a recognition of corruption. They have entirely different prescriptions of what to do about it. They have entirely different visions of who embodies it. But the idea that Washington is corrupt and on the take, they will meet you there. If you zoom in on particular issues, money and politics is one, privacy and surveillance is another. There are absolutely points of commonality that the partisan system cannot possibly embrace because it's set up to divide as opposed to enable meaningful interchange. Now, the founders of the country did not, they weren't blind to this threat. They anticipated this. The Federalist number 10 explicitly talks about the dangers of factions, what eventually, basically political parties. And the idea of responding to factions was to divide power. And we did that in the government. We can't do that in civil society. We broke power across 3 branches and a bunch of different levels. So you've got the federal, the state, the local level, the judicial, the executive, the legislative branch. So you got at least 9 branches. There aren't quite local courts, so call it 8. But then you've got the press, which is the 4th estate, so 9. So we're back to 9 branches. And in civil society, their recommendation in the Federalist was to proliferate the factions. And what do? We have 2 of them. 2 of them that don't represent, frankly, anyone. I mean, the irony, and I think you're absolutely right, Lindsay, to describe the Democratic Party's tendency to the middle. There's a French political scientist, I forget his first name, Duverger was his last name, but he talked about how in any country with a first past the post electoral system, where you have a winner take all allocation of power in response to the voting process, that it structurally forces that 2-party system to emerge because there's a strategic calculus to go after whatever the middle of the bell curve is. But the irony in today's world, right, is that we have so many issues that intersect and cut in different ways that I don't think there is a meaningful, to the extent there is a bell curve, a plurality of Americans who believe anything. What they believe is what they're spoon-fed by news organizations that are repeating Pentagon lies, which is why you see all these flags everywhere. And it's like, again, seriously, I feel sometimes like a cross between a broken record. And there's this character in Elie Wiesel's, I think it's Dusk or Night, where he describes his seminary teacher, his Torah teacher, Moshe, the Beetle. And he apparently one day he disappears and then he shows up and he's bedraggled and he looks like hell and he sounds crazy. And he's like, we got to get the hell out of here. They're going to murder us all. And, everybody calls him crazy. And, it's like, none of this surprises me anymore. I've seen America demonstrate its ignorance so many times in so many ways. It's one reason I'm not in politics anymore. I see a train that is off the rails. I have some hope for the future if it's able to find a way around its sort of not just individuated, but systemic co-optation by the president. And, I'm here as a documentarian. I'm here as a poet and an artist. I'm here as a teacher to the extent I can be. And, but yeah, when I look at what the left should be doing as messaging, I mean, the first thing I'd say is pull its head out of its ass. But I think there's a lot of fetishization of identity.
Yes.
That mistakes the need to shift and focus on material outcomes and conditions. And there's a lot of failures of solidarity masquerading as solidarity. And I do think that, whatever passes for the left in this country is magnificently confused. And I do hope one day soon it starts showing up for work.
It's pretty profound.
That was profound. Oh!
Yeah, and identity. I don't know if you're specifically referring to like identity politics or not. Were you referring to like identity politics there when you said identity, or were you more referring to the identity of the
sure.
party?
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of ways to slice it, but that's one way to refer perhaps.
And I mean, it's that. So I'm going to agree with that analysis. Well, at least because I recognize at the same time, I recognize the importance and the effectiveness that identity politics have. You know, obviously the civil rights movement being the number one example of the effectiveness in certain situations of identity politics. Lately, though, it seems like identity backfired on Stacey Abrams, unfortunately, and that's something that Lauren on our Sunday shows has been very critical of. And this is coming from a black man candidate in Fresno who was running against Devin Nunes, at least originally before they redistricted. And, every single thing can't be about, I'm Stacey Abrams, a black woman. Now, I'm not going to speak for the black community. I'll let Lauren and Haas and Mikey do that. But like, even when it comes to, our just being on the left, and advocating for things like healthcare, we end up talking about it in a way where it breeds counter identity politics. A really good example of this is Black Lives Matter, right? That should have been a very easy pill for people to swallow. Hey, Black Lives Matter. That means Black Lives Matter too, not Black Lives Matter only. But what did it do? It ended up because I don't know where the messaging went wrong. And obviously we know there's going to be people who are just overtly racist and are just going to say stupid shit to begin with. But then you get Blue Lives Matter, you get All Lives Matter, and then you end up with this counterclash of identities, and the message gets lost, muddied in the water. And then you have to argue about whether or not Black Lives Matter is a terrorist organization, instead of just saying, hey, let's focus on the police, right? And then the Democratic Party comes up with this absurd title of defund the police when there's no defunding in this whatsoever. It's reallocation of funds, reimagining, that sort of thing. And it's like, and I don't know how to make heads or tails of it. They make the job harder for us in independent media and for folks like yourselves who are out there advocating. I don't know who they is, by the way. They is just, I don't know, George Soros, I guess.
The nebulous we, the nebulous they.
Yeah. But like we end up fighting on these topics that don't matter or shouldn't matter to the American people. Now they've got us talking about trans people all the time. They didn't give two shits about trans people until they won on abortion. Yeah. I feel like my wheels are spinning, Shahid. And like, it's highly, I'm sure you're feeling the same thing as I am to a degree.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, the part that I would say maybe that I wouldn't say you're overlooking, but maybe the additional part of your question is to like observe the active co-optation, the theatrical commitment to the identities that the party puts in place of the material conditions. So it's not just the case that, we're like a dog chasing a rabbit and, we're distracted by a squirrel. And so, okay, there goes material conditions. Now we're talking about identity, but the institutional establishment, the Democratic Party, the press, pick your their commitment to the identities is no more than word deep. I mean, it's all hypocritical and vacuous.
Or it's Nancy Pelosi in a kente cloth.
Exactly. Perfect.
Yes.
Perfect example.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
You don't give two shits about that movement.
She and Hillary Clinton were speaking together recently, or maybe they're about to, or I don't know. There's some.
Oh yeah, they were advertising that.
And so I invited them. My response was, you should invite Gina Haspel to join you and call it a trifecta. And Gina is the first woman to lead the Criminal Intelligence Agency. She was the official responsible for destroying the videotape evidence of internationally criminal torture in which the agency was complicit under the Bush administration. And now she's the head of the agency. Woohoo! And, we're talking about Pentagon leaks. Well, what else is secret in the Pentagon? How about the several thousand-page torture report that the Senate compiled and that the CIA hacked the Senate to try to suppress? There's lots of secrets we could be talking about here that are still secret. And those should be parts of these stories that we're talking about. And yet again, we're seeing these patterns of ignorance and this is the part that frustrates me. It's not just patterns of ignorance, because patterns of ignorance you can address with information, right? But it's patterns of ignorance that are institutionally enforced. And that's what drove me to write these pieces about the press and congressional complicity in this secrecy regime that makes the leak significant, is because, you know, we are all being kept in the dark by agents that are supposed to be levers of information. And, you know, I just don't understand how those levers escape accountability, and everyone's talking about the leaker, you know, in the same way that instead of talking about material conditions, we're talking about identities at the same time, that like the party won't even show up for those identities, right?
Yeah.
What the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, what would it have done? It would have expanded police budgets and police surveillance. You know, what would, even in the act of supposedly showing up for the identities, there's always still a further co-optation happening.
Yeah.
And I lived in San Francisco, you know, proud bastion of this Democratic Party. It's where Nancy Pelosi, the former speaker, was from. And the way that identities there are weaponized against their own interests. You know, the gay, lesbian, trans community shares interests just like everybody else in universal health care, shares interests in, like everybody else, in climate justice. And instead, that community gets weaponized against its own interests routinely by its own representatives and leaders. And, you know, there's not a lot, you know, as an immigrant voice I can do about that. So, you know, I'm just here to watch, I guess. But this pattern, I fear, is widely replicated. And it's a big part of why we're in this mess.
Yeah.
Wow,
No,
I
I
feel
agree.
great about the future. You know,
I wish I could be an object of hope, a voice of hope.
I feel total tangent on that. I feel like 100 years from now, we won't be around. Lindsay probably will, because she's like,
oh my God, I better not be.
She's like perpetually, you know,
DNR after 75, Dutch, DNR.
Yeah. Shahid and I are aging at double the speed you are for some reason.
Nice.
But I can just tell, just a tangent to the tangent. Shahid, brother, you've aged since the first time I've seen you, brother. Like I could tell, but that's because you've been working. You know what I mean? Like,
no, it's because I haven't been able to sleep in 5 years. You know, like, I mean,
well, what, 3 congressional runs, right? Was it 2 or 3?
Well, that, but I mean, just what I went through in 2020 was described by Black journalists in 2021 as a civic lynching. And, you know, that has a way of, it'll age you.
Yeah. And like, it's, you know, and again, I have a lot of issues with Obama, but like, you know, you saw how he aged during office, and it's, you know, he was blocked on a lot of stuff that he wanted to do, but I feel like we're going to win in 100 years. I just feel like, I don't know
if we survive the climate catastrophe and the multiple nuclear escalations and God only knows what else.
Assuming that there's no meteor or nuclear or climate change, kinks thrown into the machine here. But, you know, I just, it seems like it's so freaking weird, because like, I know that in 100, 150 years, they're going to look back and they're going to be like, this movement was the start of it. And like, you saw the revolution the other day in France on Wall Street. Like, what a fucking,
that's a home of the brave.
Solidarity, right?
Yes.
Like these violent people broke in and were singing so violently. You know what I mean? Like, they were holding scary fire. But like, they got in there and they started singing. And I was like, my first reaction, of course, is because, you know, I was 40 years a conservative. My first reaction is always, oh, that's not the right way to do it. And then I have to adjust my thinking and be like, we wouldn't have a country if it weren't for revolution. You know, most countries in Europe wouldn't be where they're at right now if it weren't for revolution.
None of them would be where they're at. They'd all be ruled by kings claiming the divine right. Right. I
precisely.
Yeah.
You know, it's, but I'm not an expert on the history of every single country in Europe, but like, I don't know how to get by tomorrow without more of this revolution. And finding people willing to stir the pot is difficult. And I understand people are concerned about inflation. They're concerned about gas prices. They're concerned about their job. They're concerned about their kids. You know, I totally understand those things. I'm concerned about those things too, you know, but that doesn't mean that we can't look beyond and say, hey, what we're doing right now is not working. And then every time that I bring that you say, well, this whole problem that we're looking at right here, it's all just our system. It's our capitalistic system. And then people look at you and they get angry at you. You're always going back to that. Yeah, because that's where it all stems from. Look, you were mentioning before.
Feel free to quote Dr. King back at them when people come at you like that. Just remind them that
him? Yeah.
Well, no, not just that, but he named capitalism as one of the 3 intersecting evils. There's a reason you keep coming back to it, because it does underlie racism and militarism. And what do those things together give you if you leave them unrestrained for the 60 years and see what the will? That was the recipe for the climate catastrophe. That's the recipe for resource wars. Yeah. And he called it out. So if they believe in our nation's leaders, if they celebrate that holiday in any way, if they ever go to visit the monument, like, ask them to consider his words. And it's not you harping on capitalism. Einstein harped on capitalism. Gandhiji harped on capitalism. King harped on capitalism, all with very good reason. I mean, you could go back to Jesus if you wanted to. I mean, the commitment to sharing as a alternative to fighting everybody for whatever you can get and eating only what you kill, and throwing your sick neighbors into the street to die because they don't have the money to get medicine. I mean, it's just so twisted what our commitment to resources. And this is the irony, right? Because half the people who will defend capitalism don't have any capital.
Aren't capitalists.
In fact, most of them, yeah, exactly, aren't capitalists, right? They're just cannon fodder for capitalists. But they're so brainwashed by the propaganda that they identify with them. Or they have their 401k plan. So they've got their infinitesimal, 0.00000001% share, and now they're invested too. And so, it's like this tragedy, the paradox that then begets collectively.
That's my dad. Like capitalism is the economic system sent to us by God in his view. Okay. And that man has never owned capital in his life. He has barely gotten by for most of his life, but he will fight to the death about how essential capitalism is. Capitalism is for happiness and families in America. And he doesn't want to hear that he doesn't own anything. He's never owned not a stock, not a nothing. He hasn't had health insurance most of his life, let alone capital. And
so he's got a boot on his neck talking about
and he's got to talk about how the problem is those damn socialists and
push down harder, boot.
Exactly, because he's like, no, someday he is just the most frustrated millionaire. He will get there though. He's so close.
I know Lindsay and I have the same parents, right? Like we have to be brothers.
Not actually, for anyone listening who's now confused.
No, not actually,
we're
but
not related.
In some universe, because every time she talks about her parents, I'm like, she's talking about my parents. Like, it's like I had literally had this conversation with my dad today. But to just throw a super big irony at you guys. I don't know if you guys noticed this. When it comes to even the rich people are afraid of capitalism. They could even admit that capitalism's fucked up. I'm gonna give you a really interesting example. I don't know if you guys follow the NFL. Recently, Jeff Bezos was interested in submitting a bid to buy the Washington Commanders, the team.
I thought you were going to say something about Jeff Bezos opposing capitalism. I was about to jump out of my chair. Wait a minute.
Are we going to cheer for Jeff Bezos? Because I don't have it in me, actually.
You're not gonna cheer for Jeff Bezos. Absolutely not. Right. However,
so he tries to buy the Commanders.
You're going to cheer. You're going to laugh about what Jeff Bezos being in the conversation to buy the Washington Commanders football team brought to the table. So Jeff Bezos, according to reports, says I might be interested in buying this team from a huge racist and terrible owner, Dan Snyder, who owns the team formerly known as the Redskins. And the owners in the NFL said, wait a minute. Jeff Bezos has more money than all the rest of us put together. All these capitalist, super rich guys, the owner of Home Depot, the owner of, fucking Nike, whatever, the Microsoft, Paul Allen, I think owns the Seahawks or his family. All these people, a lot of money. They're like, wait a minute. I've been spending my whole life telling people if you just worked harder, then you could be like me. You know, this is all just opportunity, what you do with your opportunity. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with being super rich, but let a super, super rich person come into the conversation and be in this silo with them. They said, well, Jeff Bezos has unlimited resources. He would throw off the power dynamic here, and it would become an unfair culture for us. Oh my fucking irony, God.
That's something.
Isn't it weird? Isn't it convenient and weird how when the dynamic changes on them, they change their opinion?
Right. In all fairness, I think I share your outrage. I think how do I put this? The NFL in no way reflects the market or capitalism. The NFL is a racket. It's a cartel ultimately with official antitrust exemptions in the federal statutes. I mean, if the NFL didn't have its own unique statutes passed by members of Congress who are beholden to it, it would have been broken up by federal regulators years ago, because it's an open violation of antitrust statutes. And for all the reasons you're describing, it's got no pretense of competition or openness. You know, like it's a regulated league in which the fact that the owners even have that right in the first place to dictate who buys and sells teams within it. I mean, all of these things reflect basically like superpowers that are afforded to a league that shouldn't frankly enjoy any of them, as far as I'm concerned.
There's no doubt that that's true. I just relish the hypocrisy. They actually did the same thing to Trump back in they actually did the same thing to Trump back in the 80s, which is why Trump bought the XFL team, the New York, New Jersey Generals.
That's
right. Tried to blow that league up so that the Generals could get in. You know,
and then he sued the NFL, if I recall correctly,
and got $1.
Yeah, that sounds.
He won $1 in that lawsuit. But all right, so we got.
I wanted to say one thing to Shahid really quickly. So you brought up about the French and how they're the heroes and willing to protest and like really go to the mat for their people, for their country. I always think I'm a cynical optimist. I try to find optimism, but I don't have a lot of hope. But one thing I think of sometimes, and it does give me a little bit of hope, is that Coco Chanel, the Nazi, when she was working back in Paris and in France, her workers began to rebel after the Bolshevik Revolution, and they were protesting, and she got so upset that she was like, my damn workers have been watching those Americans, haven't they? And because at that time, that was the heyday. That's when America, was going hard for progressive changes and protesting and writing and doing everything that they needed to do for workers' rights. And so I hold on to that sometimes, that we were that at one point, and now we're the ones watching the French. But we had that. We could do it again.
Uncomfortable.
We could do it again.
Right on.
I have to hope
that. I think that's a great note to end on. I have nothing better to say than that. So I appreciate you having me on, and especially that vote for or the nudge for hope at the end. I would that we will once again play that role in the future.
Me too.
While I have you here, Shahid, now if I remember correctly, you are Muslim, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Now on this show, we're kind of anti-religion, but we're not anti-religious people. It's more like dogma. But here's the question I want to ask you.
Okay.
Two separate questions. So I'll ask them together, but one of them I think is relatively simple. What is your thoughts on how the media has like almost on purpose not covered what was happening in Iran a couple of months ago with these women who were being killed and imprisoned for, fighting back about not wanting to adhere to a cultural norm. Well, I'll start with that one. Just like, what's your thoughts on that situation, as far as like, especially how the media in the United States just seem to ignore that while focusing on Ukraine?
It's interesting because I would actually have a different analysis. I think the U.S. media focuses on it a lot, particularly because it's convenient, right, to an empire to criticize the human rights failings of your opponents. So, I mean, I think it's
maybe right-wing media, because I haven't seen hardly a thing on it.
I mean, even the fact that you're talking about it, I mean, for Americans to have any awareness of human rights issues in other countries tends to reflect a unique emphasis on them in the American media, right? Like that's the only, like, why are we talking about Iran in the first place? Like how do I put this? There's multiple layers here. I mean, the first is the co-optation of Islam by actors within it to deny individual agency over things like individual appearance. And if, as I think about Iran in particular, I go back to the story I shared about whenever that was, an hour ago, about 1953. Anything horrible that happens in Iran is ultimately the Pentagon's fault, because that was actually a fairly Western country until we went in and stole the oil. And when we stole the oil, we inspired a revolution. And here we are. So, like, good job, guys. Again, I think those stories, once again, mistake the trees for the forest by ignoring history, because it's not just the case that a bunch of mullahs and theocrats are denying women basic agency. It's also the fact that the Pentagon put them in a position to do that. And they escape any accountability for that history because, again, the news focuses on a current time slice as if, history didn't exist. And, current conditions just sprung forth out of, the ground one day. I hope that helps.
No, for sure. And I think that there's no doubt that, and it's sad it's almost like shattering to one's core to realize the effect that the United States and NATO have had on, and U.S. businesses have had on pretty much all of what they would refer to as the third world, right? It's
ourselves too. Don't remove ourselves from it. The climate catastrophe is coming for all of us. Like Bangladesh might end up underwater, but California will burn to the ground. Like it's not just the developing world. Like we did it to ourselves at this point. That chicken came home to roost.
We did it to them too.
Yeah, they'll fall down first, though. Unfortunately.
No, indeed, no doubt. All I mean to say is you're framing the question charitably, because we didn't just do it to other people; we did it to our own kids.
No, right? That's a super fair criticism of my, But again, that's I'm naturally an American apologist. That's how I was raised as an American apologist, right?
You're so patriotic, Dutch.
The other question I want to ask, and I'm sure Lindsay will have something to pop in with this, because as someone who used to be Mormon, a lot of these same ideas are true. But I've had some interactions with some of my Islamic friends of late when it comes to the conversation around trans people, which unfortunately we're having. We shouldn't be having it. We should be saying they're individuals, they exist, let them live their life, they're not bothering you. But unfortunately that we can't have that conversation. When Christians talk their BS about trans people, I'm well equipped to engage in that conversation because I know the Bible backwards and forwards. I don't know Quran backwards and forwards. I've read through it one time and I studied it for 6 weeks in college. I'm not an expert, right?
Right.
But when they bring up the similar arguments that, like, oh, well, this is what it says, and I can't support that movement and that sort of thing. Is there anything that you could speak on as far as that goes to maybe help folks to get some headway in that conversation without appearing to be white-splaining things to our Islamic friends, if that makes sense?
I super appreciate that invitation. Like that was I'm honored, in fact, by that question. And I'd cite a couple of things. First, one of the most recurring themes in the Quran is the idea that all people will have their own messengers, and the pretense of anyone to decide what other people's messengers should be, what their norms should be, the assumption of the position of judgment of any person, of anybody else in Islam is the greatest sin. It represents the pretense to stand in the shoes of the divine. It's shirk to cast judgment on someone. Like, it's not our right within Islam to judge other people. And if all people have the right to their own messengers and none of us have the right to judge, if we were to sincerely follow the book, it would suggest that we'd be open-minded towards everyone. There's another piece here, which is it relates to less the religious teaching and more the cultural practice that has been embraced in many countries. Previous to even industrialization, there's been a long history of trans practice, inclusion, public embracing in many Muslim countries, particularly the one I'm from in Pakistan and in Punjab in India. There's been a very long tradition and history of trans people, and it's never been a problem because it wasn't ever politicized before. That's not fair to say. It's certainly been a problem insofar as people have suffered violence and discrimination, but not certainly on the level that they have here in the United States, because it has been politicized here in a way that it was not in previous history.
Trickling there?
Pardon?
Is that trickling over there?
It very well may be. I don't frankly know. I mean, the last time I was in a Muslim country was 2007. So, I'm not the best person to ask, unfortunately. I'm more American than I sometimes wish.
As are all of us.
Lindsay, do you have any thoughts to add on those two things, like with Iran or with the?
Yeah, I'd love to hear yours. If you came from a Mormon background, I'd be really curious.
Oh, it's so bad, you guys. Oh, so there's something called a proclamation to the family. And it's everything in Mormonism is more recent. And so it's all very, there's a lot of emphasis on personal revelation, which the prophet, the head of the church, is supposed to get revelation for the whole church. But then there's a lot of emphasis on you getting revelation for yourself, which can be good and also bites the church in the ass a lot, because people have conflicting ideas, and it encourages you to conflate your ideas and your perspective and your biases as the will of God, which I know can be a problem in every religion, but it can particularly be an issue within Mormonism. And so there were a lot of questions about this. It's never been exactly acceptable, but Brigham Young, the second prophet of the Mormon Church, one of his sons was a prolific cross-dresser and would perform operas and sing and dress up in what we would call cross-dressing or being like a drag queen. That it was very much that, and he was very famous and he was very popular in Utah, and it even sprung kind of more acts like that, because at that time it wasn't the politicized issue it is now. And so it wasn't like, if somebody was actually trans, that wouldn't have been acceptable within the religion. But there's feminization was always lesser because of polygamy, and there's a lot of complicated things going on. But that is part of the history that now they're very ashamed of. That used to be, look at this, like, see, guys, we're super accepting. We're cool and kooky Christians. And you can get your own planet. I don't know. Could be a good deal. So, but in 1995, the prophet of the church, Gordon B. Hinckley, wanted standing in the Hawaii case against gay marriage. And so they crafted a document called A Proclamation to the World. And it goes through and because there was nothing in the Mormon faith that specifically said that gay marriage is wrong or that gender is essential. It just didn't exist. And so this document specifically lays out that you had your gender before you were born, that it is an innate characteristic. It cannot be changed. It is given to you by God. And so you have very specific things you are supposed to do. That
1995?
1995.
They double down on the ancient.
If there's anything the Mormon Church will do, it'll be double down 50 years after they should be doing that. That is, you can count on that. You can take that to the bank. And so, and it was very strict. Like, it was absolutely gender essentialism. Women, your job is to have babies and stay home. And there was a huge emphasis on that. Men, your job is to be the leaders in everything. And I hope your wife better listen to you, or, because you have the priesthood, you have the power of God. It was incredibly regressive. And for a while, it was initially presented as like, hey, it wasn't they were dishonest with the membership about what it was. They said this was a revelation from God to the prophet because we were heading into the last days. It was about to be the second coming, and the world was confused. They were not honest about it being standing for the marriage case in Hawaii. And as time has gone on, it used to, when I was growing up, it was like you put it on your wall. Mormons are so weird. You frame it and put it on your wall, and you read it like
What's
once a
the
year.
it here?
Oh, the proclamation to the family. So this,
Oh,
like,
I see. Okay, got it.
legal document saying like women stay home and have babies, and
That's on the wall. Okay,
it's on the wall.
Okay,
And yeah,
okay.
you study that. It was so incredibly regressive. And then starting about 2007 or 2008, and really picking up with gay marriage being legalized by the Supreme Court, they have doubled down immensely on that. That is, they talk about it at every conference. They have now said it is absolutely doctrine from God. The paper was handed to Gordon B. Hinckley, and that is absolutely the will of God. And they went so far as to, they would not baptize children who had gay parents for about a year and a half. You will be excommunicated if you do any amount of gender affirming care. And they have just completely regressed to, a very evangelical level that gender is innate. It cannot be changed. It was part of your spirit before you were born. It will be part of who you are after you die. Any attempts to change it are satanic.
Satanic?
Oh yes. It is the devil.
God.
Like, yeah, there are groups within Mormonism who believe that trans people have been so influenced by the devil they may be possessed by the devil.
They do. We watched a video yesterday. It wasn't specifically Mormon, but they were talking about the spirit, this evil spirit of trans, which came down, which comes down upon people and forces them to do stuff. Shahid, there's a question. There's a comment towards you here. From Ref, who is Muslim. I don't. Can you read that, or do you want to? Do you want to read that?
No, I'm trying to. We're ordered to stop sin we see in public, which, if we can't speak against it, then at least condemn it. Okay, suppose that's fair. This part, the right to regulate their public way they want in accordance with their beliefs. That's the part that I'm struggling with, because I don't think when we talk about trans rights, certainly when we talk about trans inclusion, I don't know if we're necessarily talking about governments regulating public behavior, right? I mean, in a lot of cases, we're talking about governments regulating private behavior. That's kind of one of the issues here. And at the end of the day, I think, the idea of seeking against the wrong that we see, that's within anybody's right. That's an individual right. Governments have powers, which is different. And so to conflate the invitation to individuals to seek justice, whatever that might mean to them. And I think, Lindsay, your analysis of how individual revelation or agency can invite this sort of problematic self-aggrandizement also is absolutely true in, the context of Muslim countries and cultures and people. But I think also if we look beyond that particular, set of invitations, the bigger theme that pervades the book is this one of loving the creator of all things by loving its creations. And that's what we could do, and that is distinctly what a hateful perspective towards anyone does not do. And I don't think anybody would necessarily disagree with government's authority to regulate public behavior, but I think that's a little different than what we're talking about here, both in the context of the leap from individual to government and in this conflation of public and private.
I think that's a great point.
Yeah.
We are almost 10 minutes over our promised time to you both. Shahid, any parting, if you would, any parting shots and promotions of your stuff?
Always great to kick it with you
and by the way, I'm going
guys.
to keep hammering you until you're like a regular partner here. Okay, just FYI. I just fucking
bring me
love
on
you,
anytime.
by the way,
You're really sweet.
We're all big
Really
fans.
sweet. That means a lot to
No,
me. That really does
seriously,
warm my heart.
like
I wear your shirt.
Wayne's World, bro. Like you,
Party on. I wear your shirt. Excellent.
What you do is not unnoticed, and you're off the charts intelligence, and the way that you communicate dwarfs mine in every way possible. And like you're the fucking best, dude. I'm just telling you. I might not agree with you on 100% of topics, but that doesn't matter because you're doing work, dude. And I'm a team Shahid, bro, for sure.
Thank you, brother. Thank you, Dutch. We're on the same team. Ultimately, I think my sunburn might be hiding my blushing, but I'm very flattered by the feedback and grateful for the chance to share ideas. I'd invite people to check out my column on Substack. Trying to put out some more DJ mixes. I keep working on some original music. I haven't dropped yet. I've been promising it for months, but hope to have that out soon. And somebody had a comment to abolish the CIA, and that's kind of like the point of the song. And yeah, I'll look forward to hopefully having that out soon. Thanks again for having me.
I can't wait to hear it.
Right on.
And I just dropped the link to one of Shahid's Substack articles. Click on that, guys, if you could, and give it a follow or a sub. Let's help support each other because we're all content creators and we all need each other's support. So, Lindsay, it's ASMR time.
I don't even have anything. We're gonna not do it. I worked a 12-hour shift.
Okay.
I've been up since 5 a.m.
That's fine.
I'm
We're
fighting
over.
for my life.
What does ASMR stand for? Just out of curiosity.
Oh, I never remember. Auto sensory meridian resonance. It's like,
oh wow,
those brain tingles you get when like people type on keyboards or like, I don't know, tickle your head or something.
The sound of a tree tapping against a window.
It's if you go. No, don't go to YouTube. You'll get some weird stuff. But anyway, so it's just
always true. Always true.
It's just these sounds that elicit this, and it's like very calming and really relaxing and stuff. So people just enjoy it because
you're being demanded to whisper by the chat. I think.
Oh my God. No, I'm not going to because that's my husband. I'll whisper when you come home, baby.
I was gonna say this sounds like some thirsty dude out here. Okay.
He should be thirsty.
I was gonna say
best internet troll ever.
Yeah, I know.
Best troll ever.
This is not a thirst trap. Okay.
That's
Shahid,
awesome.
again, thank you. Lindsay, where can the people find you who are watching for the first time?
I am socialistly awkward everywhere. So on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter. Hopefully I'll get my YouTube up at some point. But yeah, just socialistly awkward. Don't forget the T. It's not socially awkward. I can be that sometimes, but it's specifically socialistly awkward. So.
All righty. Well, then we will let you guys go. We will do a raid out. There are more viewers over. Actually, I have the Dutch Jasen account up. I'll let you two guys go and I'll talk to the chat. Shahid, thank you. Lindsay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shahid. Thank you.
Peace out.
It's so good to talk to you.
Soon.
Yeah, really good to connect with you too. Keep up the great work. I'll just talk to you guys.
We'll see you back soon. I'll force you. All right. Well, as I let them go, all right, we're gonna raid out of here, guys. But there are 6 people in both, and I have the studio for Dutch Jasen up. So if you guys would be so kind, if you're watching on Dig on America, I'm going to put the link in the chat here. So if you're watching on the Dig on America podcast in the next maybe 30 seconds or so, if you could just click on that real quick and come over to the Dutch Jasen channel, we're going to raid out and help a smaller streamer. Okay. And the more listeners that we can, the more people in the chat that we can bring over there, the better to help them out. So I already see a couple people have jumped over. So I will get a raid ready to go here. Let's see who we just got to see who we want to do that raid to. Let's see. Let's do Echoplex Media. All right. So we'll raid over to Echoplex Media. And I will wait about 10, 15 more seconds to see if anybody can pop over from the other chat. Did that message even go through? Oh, yeah, at Dutch Jasen. So just come over to Dutch Jasen if you would be so polite to do so. And we will start rating here in 1 second. And again, for those of you who tune in, thank you. I will be back on tomorrow for Satanist Saturday, or Saturdays about Satan, whatever you want to call it. And we'll start heading over to there right now. Thanks for joining in. Let me just make sure that you guys are seen by the studio, and you are. Okay, great. We're heading over.
This on Straight Beacon today, and it really Washington. So this is the article that you find the